Welcome to the final video in Madison College's Budget 101 Core Education series. Through the first 6 videos, we mainly focused on how high-level budgeting works at Madison College, such as where we get and how we spend our money. In this session, we will focus on capital funding. The goal of this video is to provide a base-level understanding of capital funding, the projects the funding supports, and the regulatory complexities of capital financing. Capital funding is different from other funding sources, which are typically called operating funding. Non-compliance with policies and rules can result in the college losing its status as tax-exempt or paying fines. In this video, we will define what can be considered capital, where the funding comes from, and how projects are selected. In order for an item to be considered capital, it has to have a useful life of 2 or more years, cannot be consumable, meaning used up like a pencil, and has to have a per unit cost of at least $5,000. The college also cannot buy a piece of equipment that will then be owned by a third party. Items that do not meet those requirements are considered non-capital equipment. The vast majority of capital projects are funded using borrowed money that has a repayment schedule, like a mortgage. This debt is paid back by taxpayers through the property tax levy. The only significant exceptions are projects funded by private gifts, such as the Goodman South campus. When borrowing funds, they must be borrowed for equipment, technology, construction, or site work. All capital funding, regardless of source, must be approved by the district board. All approved capital projects must have a project ID. To ensure that capital funds are being expended in compliance with IRS regulations, the Budget Office conducts capital budget monitoring on a quarterly basis. We monitor spending and follow up with cost center managers to ensure projects are on schedule. Once projects are completed, the Budget Office removes any remaining funding from the project, and that funding is reallocated to other projects. In most cases, the Budget Office does not allow capital funds to be carried over beyond the current fiscal year. There are various types of capital projects. Capital projects are split into 4 different categories: movable equipment, remodel, new construction, and site work. Movable equipment projects typically consist of academic equipment, non-academic equipment, furniture, or technology. Movable equipment can also be capitalized as multi-component equipment, as a fabrication, or as project-related equipment. Multi-component equipment is comprised of individual pieces of equipment or material items that are connected together to operate as a system. Individually, these component pieces may cost less than $5,000, but when combined, they exceed $5,000. Multi-component equipment may be capitalized when purchased for one functional unit. An example of multi-component equipment would be refreshing a computer lab. Fabrication is equipment that is constructed or developed by combining parts or materials into one identifiable unit. An example of a fabrication would be installing a workstation. Individual components of a workstation, such as the laptop, chair, or filing cabinet, may not cost $5,000, but together, once constructed, these function as one single unit and do cost $5,000. Project-related equipment is equipment that is associated with a larger construction project. In this instance, the $5,000 threshold is waived in order to allow for the capitalization of an original complement of low-cost equipment and furnishings for the initial space. Equipment must still meet the useful life threshold and cannot be consumable. These items will share a project ID with the larger construction project. Some software can be purchased with capital funding if it has a useful life of 2 or more years and meets the $5,000 capitalization threshold. If the purchased software is minimally modified to fit the needs of Madison College, then the cost of these modifications can be capitalized as part of the software cost. If the software is more than minimally modified, it is considered internally generated software. Internally generated software can only be capital if it costs more than $100,000 to create. License agreements can be capitalized as long as they meet the capital threshold, we pay for 2 or more years, and there is no annualized breakdown or reference to maintenance. Maintenance agreements do not typically meet the definition of a capital item because maintenance is generally considered an operating expense. However, if it can be tied into the license agreement and not itemized, then it can be capitalized. Extended warranties cannot be capitalized under any circumstances. Now we will transition into the construction side of capital, beginning with remodeling. Remodel projects are those that cost at least $15,000 and result in a permanent structural improvement to the building or a change in room dimension. Examples include adding or removing permanent walls, moving a doorway, and replacing a roof. A remodel project can have a total project cost of up to $1.5 million per state statute. New construction includes the cost of land acquisition or any square footage additions to the college's current footprint. We are limited to borrowing $1.5 million per site every 2 years. A site is any campus within 30 miles. For Madison College, this means new construction can be completed at each regional campus every 2 years and once for Madison Metro campuses every 2 years. Site work projects are projects where permanent improvements are made to the exterior of a building, including grounds. We are limited to borrowing $1.5 million per project. Examples include repairing or replacing parking lots and upgrading walkways. Now that we have defined the different types of capital projects, we will identify how the college chooses which projects to complete. We will first look at equipment projects. Equipment projects typically come from 3 different plans: the technology services refresh schedule, the maintenance plan, or equipment that is associated with a larger construction project, which would typically include workstations. Equipment requests that are not a part of a long-term plan are submitted through an annual capital equipment request process.
The annual capital equipment process begins with a department or school determining it needs to buy new or replace existing equipment. Once a request is submitted, it goes to the appropriate vice president for approval. If the item is approved by the vice president, then it will move forward to the budget office so that they can review the project's capital eligibility and, if approved, provide work tags for project implementation. The college typically solicits for projects that are to take place in the subsequent fiscal year early in the spring semester, with approval coming late in the spring semester. However, even though there is a defined solicitation period, additional equipment can be requested if needs arise. Project selection on the construction side is similar to that on the equipment side. Projects typically originate from one of 3 long-term plans: the Facilities Master Plan, which was created by the Facilities Planning and Investment Council, the 3-year Facilities Plan, and the Maintenance Plan. Small construction projects can also be requested on an ad hoc basis. Construction projects follow a more extensive approval process as they are more complex and have a longer lasting impact on the campuses. Ad hoc projects can be requested from managers throughout the college. Projects are forwarded to the Capital Work Team for the review and recommendation. The Capital Work Team is a team of subject matter experts from across the college that are responsible for managing the project approval process and monitoring project implementation. The Capital Planning Team consists of select members from the Capital Work Team, as well as members of the President's Cabinet. This group is responsible for providing strategic oversight and final approval of capital projects. If approved by the Capital Planning Team, the project then moves forward to the President for review and approval. Most projects, if approved by the President, must also be approved by the District Board and the WTCS Board. All construction projects over $25,000, which is nearly all done by Madison College, must be awarded based on a competitive bid process per state law. Projects are typically designed or planned during the fall, bid during the winter, and constructed during the late spring and summer periods. From the time a project is incepted to the point in which the project is actually ready for construction can last up to 2 years. In conclusion, in order for a project to be considered capital, it must have a useful life of 2 or more years and cost $5,000 or more per unit or set. Projects can either be equipment, software, or construction, with construction having the longest and most complex approval timeline. Capital funds are primarily borrowed and as a result must comply with more rules and regulations than operating funds. We ask for your help in complying with these rules and with meeting spending deadlines, and ask for your understanding that project approval can take a long time. If you have questions regarding capital or related items, please do not hesitate to contact the Budget Office. We are always here and happy to help.